Hey guys, how's it going? This is Chappie here at Intense, and for today's edition of Tech Tutorial Videos, we're going to go over how to properly retorque and service our links. And for this video, we're going to focus on our lower link assembly. So we're going to go ahead and remove our cone spacer using our 5mm Allen. Next, we'll take our 8mm Allen, which the 8mm Allen is what actually engages our pivot axle here. So in order to retorque, we always want to relieve the torque on that pivot axle to start with. So let's go ahead and loosen that pivot axle. And we are going to adjust this to the suggested torque value of this pivot axle, which is 7 Newton meters. And then we'll go ahead and re-tighten this bolt. So there we have 7 Newton meters. That pivot axle has been retorqued. We'll take our cone spacer and our 5mm Allen head bolt. Using our 5mm Allen, prep the bolt like such. Reinsert into that pivot axle. Simply just go till snug. With the 5mm Allen installed and reset to 11 Newton meters. All right, now moving on to the front pivot of the lower link. Torque wrench listed goes to 15 Newton meters. However, we can, little secret, we can go 5 turns past. More. And that will get us to 20 Newton meters, which is our suggested torque value for this pivot. Holding that 3-way Allen that we have positioned on the other side, then our torque wrench on this side, we'll go ahead and break this pivot axle free. And then reverse that torque wrench to reset the torque value of that pivot axle. And there we have it. Let's move on to the process of how to basically remove and service the lower link assembly. Make sure your drivetrain is in the smallest gear of the cassette. That'll make things much easier for rear wheel removal. Let's move on to removing the rear shock. Just take care to not let that rear shock drop out. Loosen the front shock bolts, remove those. We will go ahead and set our rear shock out of the way. So from this point, in order to gain a little bit more access to where we're going to be working, we'll remove the rear fender. I prefer to start with the rear lower link pivot first. So we'll go ahead and remove the silver 5mm Allen head bolt. Then out comes that cone spacer along with that bolt. Then we'll come back with our 8mm and loosen. Pull that out, set that off to the side. So from there, we'll rotate the rear triangle up slightly. Then we will pull the plastic cap out of the drive side of that same pivot axle. So it's a 5mm on both sides. So now I'll just go ahead and loosen. Now that we have both pivot axles out, we can go ahead and remove the lower link assembly. So easiest way to do this is go ahead, rotate our rear triangle up, pull it back. Want to take into account the 2 spacers that sit here between the lower link and the front triangle, and also the 2 spacers that sit between the lower link and the rear triangle. They can and will fall out through this process, so just keep track of those. So rear triangle back and up, and then we can slide our bottom link up. Then once we get it to this position, we'll go all the way forward to the seat tube and rotate out. And there you have it. There is our lower link. Go ahead and take this to the workbench. We'll go ahead and wipe everything totally clean and free from grease and grime. All right, so now that we've gotten through wiping everything down, we've inspected the hardware to make sure everything's intact, make sure everything is moving freely. So through our website, we offer lower link complete replacements with bearings already installed, grease certain, the whole 9 yards. Or we do offer just bearing replacement if you want to dive into a little bit more extensive maintenance on your own. So the grease port here is used to fill and purge the lower link rear pivot of old grease and filling it with new grease. It's not something you need to do regularly, but it definitely doesn't hurt. It does require your lower link and then the pivot axle inserted like such. This will direct the grease into its intended positions. There is a detent ball in the center of this zerk, and then there's a matching one in the grease gun tip. So simply by just pressing those two interfacing components together, go ahead and pump that. All right, so as you can see, through this grease port, we have filled this entire lower link area full of grease, and it's began to purge out of the metal shield angular contact bearings that we see here. Just slide this axle out. Then we can just simply wipe away that excess grease. Now we can prep the lower link for reinstallation. So what we'll do is we'll take our grease gun, apply little dollops, and set that on the bearing, on the face of the bearing. What that does is kind of acts like a glue. All right, so now the lower link is prepped and ready for installation. So let's head back over to the bike. So you notice I did not put the spacers in here yet. So take note of that. We will do that after we slide the bottom link over the seat tube. So just like before, we will rotate our rear triangle up and pull it straight back. We'll take our lower link at this angle and slide it over the seat tube, spin it 90 degrees, just making sure everything stays in place. Just take care to make sure that that spacer is still in place as we slide the rear triangle past that pivot point on the lower link. So once it's in that position and our spacers are still in place, they will not go anywhere from this point on. Spacer installation, what we'll want to do here is push the link up and forward to expose the back surface of the bearing like that. We'll just take our spacers with the large flat top hat surface facing the carbon like such. So the small side will only fit one way, and that will only fit into the lower link contacting the bearing. So we'll hold that one in place. We'll go ahead and grab the same spacer, slide onto that side, and we'll just let that drop over the front triangle till it lines up with that pivot hole like such. The next step is to install our pivot axles in hardware. So we have our pivot axle oriented in the same way that we did when we pulled it apart. We're going to take the shank, insert it into the front lower link pivot, line it up with the frame, slide it through. Now make sure that that pivot axle goes all the way flush, and then we will mate it with the shoulder bolt on the drive side. Insert through the rear triangle pivot point, through the bearings and lower link. Get everything lined up. Give this a cycle. Everything feels nice and smooth. With our torque wrench, we're going to torque our rear pivot of our lower link. Now we'll come back with our cone spacer and our 5mm bolt. We're going to put a small amount of grease on our cone spacer and go ahead and get that started. All right, so we've completed that side. We're going to engage this into our pivot axle. Take our 5mm Allen on this side. We're going to go ahead and torque. And there we have it. Now, last step is just simply reinstalling the rear wheel. Everything looks good there, wheel spins free. We have successfully completed the lower link retorquing sequence and the lower link removal and service. If you have any questions on this process or any other additional questions on symptoms you might be having, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're more than happy to help you diagnose and service your Tazer MX Expert or Pro. Thanks for choosing Intense.